Recording, and we're going to get started. So welcome, everyone. On behalf of the Georgian Association in the United States of America, let me welcome you and thank you for joining us today for a very special occasion, very special conversation that's dedicated to the Voice of America Georgian service. My name is Salome Tsereteli-Stevens. I'm the current president of the Georgian Association. And as a matter of introductions, most of you, probably, if not all of you, know that Georgian Association is the oldest Georgian diaspora organization that's still operational in the United States. It was founded in 1932 and became a charitable organization in 1960s and has continued to be a nonprofit organization that's serving the purpose of supporting the Georgian diaspora, also helping nurture Georgian culture and language, advocate for the Democratic Republic of Georgia, and strengthening ties between the U.S. and Georgia. Today, as a volunteer-run organization, Georgian Association depends on the time and incredible generosity of people like yourselves, like our speakers today, like our attendees to the various events. And we're extremely lucky to have an army of dependable advisors, well-wishers, volunteers who may be diverse in their experiences, bring different backgrounds, different political or ideological beliefs, but they share one thing in common, and that is the love for Georgia and their hearts beating for its well-being and independence. Today, several of those past and present members of the board, as well as past presidents, are joining us here. We're very excited about this. And I'm really glad that we have a very interesting moment where we are connecting the past with the future. So you see some on our background here, there's a letter that Eka, our secretary of the board, will be talking about it today. And it looks very old, as well as the first, on the left, you see the picture of Secretary of State Dean Acheson giving the speech at the Voice of America's first broadcast. So this is very much rooted in the past. But how is this connected to the future? Some of you may have attended the event on May 17th this year. We had an event at the Hill Center in Washington, D.C., where we previewed an important collaboration between the Georgian Association and the Davis Georgian Program on Georgian Studies at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. The goal of this collaboration is to bolster collection, documentation, and archiving of Georgian diaspora history. And that includes materials such as photographs, documents, as well as memories and stories, such as those that you can see on the website. It's called Heritage Remembered, and we're going to put a link to that website in the chat, as well as you probably saw it on our website in the announcement for this event. You can also see some of those stories under Georgians in the USA and profiles on the Georgian Association website. And you can see an entire page dedicated to the Voice of America on the Georgian Studies Program website. But today we're going to be adding a bit more human flavor to what you can find on the website. We have a marvelous group of speakers who will give us an overview from the very beginning, or as close to the roots as possible, share some of their memories, as well as Georgian Americans and as family members of the VOA staff, as well as members and leaders of the Georgian Association. So with that, and without further ado, again, let me welcome you and let me hand the microphone over to Eka Imerlishvili, our secretary of the board, to introduce our guests and tell us why we're doing this event specifically today and what to expect for the next hour or so. Thank you. Over to you, Eka.
Thank you, Salome. Hi, everyone. My name is Eka Imerlishvili, and I'm currently serving as the secretary at the Georgian Association. Before handing it over to our incredible host and guest today, let me take a few moments of your time to share about this letter that inspired today's event. And this letter we came across this letter as part of this partnership with Georgian Studies Program at Harvard University's Davis Center that Salome mentioned. The letter is dated August 24, 1958. And at that time, Georgian service at the Voice of America was facing an existential threat, as decision makers at that time were considering folding it into the Russian-speaking service. And so this letter that you see on the right side of your screen, and I'm going to be shortly sharing the link to it in the chat as well, is a call for advocacy to the Georgian diaspora globally to leverage their resources, reputation, and connections to write letters to decision makers and power holders like President Eisenhower, then Secretary of State John Foster Dulles, and as well as to the Foreign Relations Committee of the United States Senate to ask them, to reconsider that decision. So first of all, it's no coincidence that we are meeting today on August 22nd, almost 67 years ago to the date, to mark this historical moment and call of action of Georgian diaspora. Additionally, and again, you will see shortly when I will read some passages from the letter, the parallels between developments back then in 1958 and today are striking. As we will see, Georgians face the same threats and fears, and VOA's fate is similarly facing an existential moment, albeit at a much larger and more consequential scale. So let me quickly share the link in the chat for all of your perusal at your leisure. This is the, oh, Salma, you did share it already. Thank you. I know you shared the website. Okay. And then I am also going to share the Georgian link, sorry, the English link of the letter that we translated. It's an unofficial translation and doesn't do the justice to the letter spirit. But I hope for those of you who don't speak English, Georgian, which the original letter is written in, will get a flavor of its spirit. And so I'm going to read out passages from that letter in Georgian. And for those of you following in English can follow by looking at the highlighted areas, because these are the passages I'm reading from the text. So here it goes. Washington-დან გვაცნობეს, რომ უახლოეს მომავალში ამერიკის ხმის ქართული განყოფილება დაიხურება. მართალია, რამოდენიმე თვის წინად ხმები უკვე გაავრცელეს, ვითომც რუსული განყოფილების გარდა ყველა დანარჩენი უნდა გააექმებინათ. მათი აზრით, საბჭოთა კავშირის 15 რესპუბლიკის ცხოვრებლებისათვის რუსული ენა სავსებით გასაგები არის. თქვენ უკეთ მოგეხსენებათ, რომ ამ გადაწყვეტილებით ქართველი ხალხი საშინლად ილანძღება. ყოველივე ფერის რუსობისაგან ძალმომრეობის და დაუზაგველობის ცდის მსხვერპლი ხდება. ქართველი ხალხი ასეთ განსაცდელში ფრიად იშვიათად ყოფილა. So again, as you can see, a lot of parallels with today, quite striking, and it deeply resonated with me. And as you will also see from the bottom of the letter, this emotional appeal to the Georgian diaspora is written by Georgian associations, then President Vano Kobakhidze, Salome's predecessor, and much revered Secretary Petra Khvedelidze, my predecessor. And it's obvious that they really understood the value and how vital VOA Georgian service was to the diaspora, as well as, of course, to Georgians on the other side of the Iron Curtain. So we are gathered today to honor not only this historical importance of this letter, which written in 1958, almost 67 years to the date, as mentioned earlier, but also the living history that surrounds it. By holding this event just 2 days before the anniversary of its writing, we symbolically connect ourselves to the moment when Georgians in the diaspora raise their voices in defense of the Georgian service. Yet our purpose today goes beyond commemoration. We are here to also celebrate and remember the many people who at different times and in different ways were touched by the struggles and hopes captured in that letter. Some listened in secret, and they will also be speaking with us today as part of our, some of our speakers will be speaking to that. Some worked tirelessly behind the microphone, and others advocated for the VOA's survival. And together they shaped and carried forward the enduring legacy of VOA's Georgian service. So let me introduce our speakers today, starting with our distinguished host, Elisa Kvitashvili, who is the daughter of Nicolas Merab Kvitashvili, Voice of America's broadcaster beginning in 1953. Eliso is the first senior Georgian American diplomat of Georgian heritage with tours in Russia, Afghanistan, and Afghanistan, among other countries. She was part of the team that opened USAID in Georgia and Azerbaijan in 1992 and 1993, and she became the president of the Georgian Association in 2016 and served in that role until 2020. Next, we have John Tsotne Dadiani, son of Michael Dadiani and Tina Gomertelli, both of whom were broadcasters at Voice of America Georgian service. Michael, Tsotne's dad, worked at the VOA full-time soon after its inception in New York in 1951 until the mid-1960s. And Tina worked as part-time when Georgian Voice wanted a female voice. Tsotne retired as director of a business unit for a major corporation and is currently serving one of the longest serving Georgian Association board members since 2015. Then we have Ramaz Bluashvili, who is a Georgian filmmaker, researcher, and science promoter. His research interests highlights Georgian-American ties through figures like Alexander Kartveli, George Balanchine, and General John Shalikashvili. As a young man, and often at personal risk, he tuned into the VOA Georgian broadcasting to hear music, stories, and news from afar. And last but not least, we have Eka Magaldadze, who is a Georgian journalist based in Washington, D.C. Eka joined the VOA Georgian service in 2017 and served there until very recently. Her work focused on explaining U.S. political processes and policies to Georgian-speaking audiences in Georgia and abroad, and covering diaspora stories and spotlighting community voices in the U.S. As we will find out, she is part of the youngest generation of VOA journalists who have been part of the team that helped service evolve into digital and television-focused platforms and have contributed to its growing reach and presence online. So I think it's going to be a wonderful conversation today. And so I am very pleased to welcome Eliso as our host today. Eliso, thank you. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salome and Eka, and good day, everyone. And thank you for joining us today. Today, as explained by Salome and Eka, we salute those among the Georgian diaspora in the United States who worked as journalists at the Georgian service of the VOA, providing an objective and accurate account of world events to Georgia since 1951. As you perhaps know, initially the Voice of America was based in New York City, and it was established to counter Nazi propaganda and disseminate American views and information in Nazi-occupied Europe during World War II. But with the start of the Cold War, the VOA quickly expanded programming in countries occupied by the Soviet Union. The VOA quickly became a major international broadcaster with an audience of primarily non-Americans, especially those living in countries without press freedom or independent journalism. It's important here to note that in 1994, the VOA instituted a firewall by which, and I quote, interference was prohibited by any US government official in the objective, independent reporting of news, thereby safeguarding the ability of Georgian journalists to develop content that reflected then and now the highest professional standards of journalism, free of political interference, unquote. It further, a quote again, demonstrated American pluralism by providing balanced coverage of news events and robust political debate, regardless of how it reflected on current government officials. The firewall protects VOA services by insulating their editorial decisions from political interference, unquote. Now, the VOA Georgian service not only reported uncensored news about world events, but shared the American perspective on issues at large, thereby promoting an understanding of the United States. News coverage was daily and included perspectives on art, music, and especially sports. I remember my father, Merab Kvitashvili, bringing home the Beatles' first album and telling me that the service had just played some of the music on air. And I think it was the Georgian service that introduced the Beatles to the Georgian public, although jazz music was apparently the preferred sound. News broadcasts were written to highlight American values, but my father loved to broadcast the sports highlights. By the early 1950s, the VOA broadcasts were reaching over 60 countries worldwide. And over time, this grew to more than 100 countries in about 48 different languages. As was mentioned, the VOA's Georgian service was launched on May 26, 1951, a very auspicious date for Georgia. Dean Acheson, then the US Secretary of State, delivered the opening message with the now famous line, quote, "Georgia has often been conquered, but never subdued," unquote. A possible shutdown in 1959, as mentioned in the letter referred to by both Salome and Eka, was averted thanks to the efforts of many members of the Georgian community, including members of the Georgian Association, some of whom also worked at the VOA. The original members of the Georgian service, in many cases relatively new immigrants to the United States, like my father, came from many different backgrounds. Many Georgian immigrants in the 1950s were staunch anti-communists and actively campaigned for an independent Georgia. Working at the VOA was one method of countering Soviet propaganda by speaking the truth. While not a clandestine service, due to the sensitivity of their work, the Georgian service broadcasters did not use their names when they reported. Eka, is that still the case today? Do you use your name online, or are you still using a pseudonym?
Hello, thank you. Thank you for the question. No, we were allowed to use, of course, our first and last names and real names, thankfully. But of course, the challenges are very different in every year, and I'm sure that we will have a chance to talk about it later. There might not be Iron Curtain, but the challenges in every country, the same as in Georgia, are the same. So broadcasting from here back to Georgia had its different challenges this time.
Okay, thanks for that. Do you happen to know when broadcasters at the service were allowed to begin using their own name? How long has that been?
Well, it's been definitely several decades for sure, especially after the independence.
Okay, yeah, so that probably makes sense. Probably after Georgia became independent, the broadcasters could use their own name. Okay, Ramaz, just a question for you. Do you recall when you listened to the VOA, did you know who was actually speaking, or did you just know the broadcasters by the fake names they were using?
No, of course not. First of all, hello to everyone, and thank you for organizing. No, I didn't. And I remember distinctly my father would find like a special place under the tree because you had to walk around to actually have a clear voice. And of course, because my name is Ramaz, my favorite one was Ramaz Jabadari, which I would never believe in later that I actually met Mr. Gogitopouridze in Washington, D.C. at his house, and we spoke, and I told him the story. No, we didn't know who people were there, and it was kind of like a window to me, which was so different, so beautiful. There was music was different. People were talking freely, which was, as a kid, I could see the difference. I could see the difference where I lived, the Soviet Union, and those people. So, because as you can imagine, one time I, just wrote NASA on my desk, and my father got called into the school, basically telling, they were telling him, "Why is your son writing NASA on the table?" So you're talking about the United States to him. So that was the situation we lived in. And
Okay.
this little window, the sound window, was very precious, very different, and something that I always wanted to touch and feel. And I'm lucky enough to actually be able to do it.
Thanks, Ramaz. We'll come back to you to get more of your impressions because it's very important to have that voice from Georgia, having heard the VOA. Okay, so let's continue. I want to speak for a moment about the first director of the Georgian service and a founding member of the Georgian Association, who was Irakli Orbeliani. Irakli was born in Tbilisi and came from one of the most illustrious families in Georgia. He was a musician by profession, but in 1950, he accepted a request by the US government to head the newly created Georgian service. Later, he was appointed chief of the South USSR branch, which comprised Georgian, Armenian, Azerbaijani, Turco-Tartar, and Turkestani services. When the latter three services were abolished a couple of years later, Irakli reverted to the head of the Georgian service, where he remained until he died in March 1954. The Georgian community in the US at the time greatly mourned his loss, lauding his brilliance and great personal charm. Other early members of the Georgian service included Misha and Tina Danyadi. And Tsotne, can I ask you to remind us where your father and mother were from?
My father was Mingrelian from Semigrelo. My mother's family was from Tbilisi.
Okay, thank you. I also want to do a shout out to Lyso. I see your sister is also there. Nice to see you, Lyso. So my father, Merab Kvitashvili, he was an engineer and he was from Raja, and his name online or on air was Nico Rajveli. Then we also had Simon Siko Kobiashvili, who was a distinguished soldier, also from Tbilisi. Givi Kobahidze, and of course our beloved Petre Kvedelidze, who also came from a military background and who joined the Voice of America in 1967. Another early member included Leila Pichkadze. Now, I can't name everyone who was a member of the Voice of America in those earliest days due to our time constraint, so please don't be upset if I didn't name somebody you knew or a family member. Now, I should mention that none of these early broadcasters had a background in journalism or had served as broadcasters. Being asked to join the Georgian service was not only a job, but a way of maintaining a communication with Georgia and countering the hated Soviet propaganda. I should further mention the close connection between the members of the Georgian service and the Georgian Association. Many Georgian immigrants were active anti-communists and participated in several Georgian American organizations, including the Georgian Association, and wrote articles for the many Georgian newspapers which sprang up. This served to maintain their language and culture, and members of the diaspora, including my father, wrote to and spoke to members of Congress, providing details about what was really happening in their native country. Now, the radio era of the Voice of America was approximately between 1951 and the early 1990s. At that time, radio was the only reliable format for reaching audiences behind the Iron Curtain. Radio remained the dominant and most trusted medium for Georgian audiences, although it was listened to in secret, as we already mentioned. Ramaz, I'm coming back to you now. Can you tell us what you and your family used to listen to and what was especially appreciated? What subject matter? Was it the art? Was it the music? Was it sports? What did you guys listen to?
Well, as I said, everything, because everything was different. News was different, which there was the only place we could hear those names or those events because Soviet propaganda wouldn't give us those news. Music, as you mentioned, like whether it's Beatles or jazz, it was people would listen to rock and jazz here underground. They would like smuggle in vinyl records and listen to the underground. So to have something like that, which we could control, yeah, it was difficult to get it, but we could actually listen, and we felt free. We felt free, and as I mentioned, all those news that we were getting from United States or from the rest of the world it would give us a chance to know actually what was going on into the world that was forbidden for us, that was closed and shut for us. So yeah, Voice of America was something that really helped me to do what I did later on.
Okay, can you explain to our listeners how you listened? What did you have to do? Did you have to take your radio and,
Yeah, I mean, my
hide
father.
somewhere, or what did you do?
Well, my father would never do it in Tbilisi. We had this village in Haragauli, Imereti region, and my father, I remember distinctly, he would take this radio, it was with a long antenna, and he would walk around our backyard to get the clearest voice. And then when he would find it, he would put the radio on the little chair, and everyone would gather around it and just to listen to the world that was basically hidden for us.
And can you say what would happen if people were caught listening to the VOA, or if a neighbor overheard and whispered
Well,
something to the secret police? Do you
yeah,
know?
the best part is everyone was doing this. Everyone knew they were doing it. But of course, everyone was trying to do it, in hidden places, not to be in the public, not to actually talk about what they heard on the Voice of America, because you never knew. Like, for example, my father, first time he traveled to the United States was in 1977. When I was growing up, he was telling me stories how he met Alexander Putkaradze and Shota Dumbadze in California. And he was telling me these great stories, how he met them and they invited them to Supra. But at the end, he would say, don't tell these stories at school. Keep it yourself. So that was the situation. And Voice of America,
Okay.
listened to it, but we didn't really talk about it.
Okay. One last thing.
Sure.
On the sports, were they talking only about American sports, world sports? What was the connection to Georgia or sports within the former Soviet Union? Can you say?
They were actually, as I remember, they were talking about the world sports. A connection to Georgia was not really, big, but as I said, we were thirsty for the information. Everything was very interesting. And when
Okay, that's
someone won the championship in Kenya, yeah, it was great. It was interesting.
okay. Great. Thank you again for your reflections. Okay, so let's continue. Although radio programming continued, obviously TV was introduced at some point, and in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the VOA Georgian service added a weekly talk show broadcast on Georgian stations. The TV program, which was called Washington Today, was the first TV program, and it was launched in 2010 in partnership with a Georgian broadcaster as part of the partnership between the two media organizations. So by this time also, the people in the Georgian service came with backgrounds in broadcast journalism, and it was a younger generation of Georgians at the helm. I recall, again, this is already early 2000, 2010 or so. I recall giving several interviews to the VOA when I was president of the Georgian Association during this new era. And I would try to explain what we were doing to foster greater understanding about Georgia to the American public, especially Congress. And when we held public events like mini conferences or different types of speaking events, the VOA would frequently record them and sometimes share with their audiences in Georgia. So we've now shifted to more of a visual type of broadcasting with the TV. And then later, even further, around 2009, the Georgian service began shifting to the internet or digital media, launching a digital first strategy using a website, social media, YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And by 2018, the VOA Georgian service officially stopped shortwave radio, marking the end of the radio era. And we have Eka, who worked at the VOA Georgia service exactly during this period, who can speak to this transition shortly. Okay, so let's continue. Now let me shift gears a bit and talk a little bit more about some of my reflections. When the VOA moved from New York City to Washington, D.C., I believe around 1955, my sister and I, my sister Mary, who's online today, we were growing up in the Washington, D.C. area in the late 1950s. It was a very small community of Georgians, no more than half a dozen families in the DC area, with a small handful in New York, including the Somayas and Aristabi families, the New England families, all the Stanis, of course, a couple of families in the Midwest. I remember the Chataras and the Gablianis, and one or two families, including Vakhtang Jobadze in Los Angeles on the West Coast. Sotne or Lyso or Mary, do you remember other families? Because as I said, we were a very small community. Do you remember other families whose names I've forgotten besides your own? Sotne?
No, I mentioned in a response to you earlier. There was a Sulhanishvili in California who was a good friend of my father's. But other than the families you already mentioned, I know my father communicated quite a bit with Chatalashvili in Illinois, and also the families in New York, and I mentioned to Lizzie once that often heard the Zeldestani name in our household. So again, it was a small community, as you mentioned. So it was, even though it was geographically dispersed, it was still a tightly knit community with everybody with similar backgrounds and similar love for their country. So
yeah. I mean, the families were pretty close. It was a tight-knit community. And I recall we would host each other for family get-togethers. Georgian was obviously spoken. Georgian type food was eaten, although it was hard to get some of the ingredients. The women would do the best they could. But most importantly, news was exchanged. News of Georgia, the latest news that people had heard from whatever sources. So it was a way of maintaining that connection. And I would also say there was a strong connection between the U.S. community, the U.S. Georgian diaspora based in the U.S., as well as with France, which had a large diaspora community. And I remember Victor Homeriki and Levan Zurabishvili, former President Salome Zurabishvili's father, were leading figures in the French diaspora, and my father was in contact with them. Now, as I mentioned earlier, many early members of the Georgian service arrived in the U.S. after World War II. Sotne, when did your father arrive?
we arrived here in 1947.
47, so before, okay, so you were one of the earlier ones then. So my father received a call when he was working as an engineer in Bolivia in early 1951. And he was recruited into the Georgia service because he had not only fluent Georgian, but he was also fluent in English, Russian, and French. And what he told me is that the VOA needed people who understood English because many Georgian immigrants did not have strong English skills. Sotne, do you remember how your father came to join the VOA?
I believe he was called by Mr. Odbeliani, but didn't quite fit the criteria that you just mentioned. He did not speak English very well, and certainly not fluently, but he certainly was fluent in Georgian, having lived there all his life. So, and I think he welcomed the opportunity to be able to join the VOA.
Do you happen to recall how Petre Kvedelidze came to join the Voice of America?
I don't remember how. I remember when, and he and my father had a friendship that went way back, and And so once he joined The Voice, we saw Petre a lot. He would come out to the house, and after a while, it was Uncle Petre. So
Of course, he was Uncle Petre to all of us. And for those of you that didn't know Petre Kvedlidze, he essentially was the Georgian Tamada throughout all of Washington, D.C.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Okay. So because communication with family and friends in Georgia remained difficult, when the occasional Georgian did come to the United States, usually as part of a cultural exchange, the Georgian community, particularly in DC, would try to speak with them. I remember many a late night knock on the door when a Georgian artist had been able to sneak away from his Soviet minder and spend a couple of hours talking with my father, sharing news of Georgia, and hopefully bringing a letter or two from family. My father said that although he used a pseudonym, his real name was known in Georgia, apparently. And Sautney or Lyso, do you recall such visits from people that came to your house? Sautney or Lyso?
yeah, there were people that were part of a cultural exchange, and in the early '60s there was exchange with a group of Georgian dancers came to the United States, and my father hosted several of them at the house, and we're able to tell some stories, both about the United States and Georgia. But there was some concern about interacting with somebody as a U.S. government employee, interacting with somebody from the Soviet Union. There was some sensitivity there about how much they could really talk about. There was caution on both sides, so to speak.
Right. Okay. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
And there were other visitors, from time to time, and some of them would visit for a few hours, and some stayed for a few days, and they're always welcomed. And that's part of Georgian hospitality. If somebody from Georgia showed up, well, of course you were invited in. You stayed for dinner and stayed up all night talking. Because those opportunities didn't come very often.
Yeah. So my sister Mary and I were very young at the time, and didn't really appreciate what our father was really doing at first. I'm not sure we really understood. Sautney, did you what did you think of what your parents were doing? Did you understand the value of the VOA and what they were doing?
No, at first I really didn't. I knew there were radio broadcasters, and they were sending news across the Iron Curtain. I didn't really understand the importance of it, but after a while, there was so much in the news about during the Cold War. The Berlin Wall. There was the U-2 incident, the Hungarian Revolution. So you start to get a little more sense of really what was going on in Russia, and the aggression toward the various republics, including Georgia. So over time you got to see what the importance of it was, and the fact that so much news was the radio broadcasts were being jammed, but the people there at the Georgian service, your father, my father, Mr. Kobiashvili, they're all patriots, and they really believed in their mission. And so even though broadcasts may have been jammed, they kept at it, put a lot of hours, a lot of personal effort on their part, for the love of the country.
Thank you, Sautney. Thank you. Ramaz, I'm gonna come back to you for your perspective on the VOA, because it's so different. You were on the receiving end of what Sautney and my father and other fathers were trying to do. Can you tell us what and how you came to know about the VOA? You mentioned your father several times. So is it as a result of what your father was listening to?
Yes, as I mentioned, he traveled to United States in 1977, and he brought some American newspapers, which was my first introduction to American, way of life and colored newspapers. We never seen that before. And then as I grew up and I started understanding things, yeah, that was the first one when I saw my father trying to, catch the different sound, very different from what we had, like the Soviet radio, only propaganda. That's what. So I slowly and surely, when I was growing up, I was understanding how important VOA was, because as I said before, we needed that window. We needed to some kind of maybe very small but connection to the rest of the world, to the United States of America, which was pretty much forbidden. America was completely forbidden. And so that was the only genuine voice that was coming from America to us, telling us stories, giving us some different perspectives on world events. And we would listen to this unbelievable music that we would never hear here in the United States. So, as I mentioned, growing up, Voice of America really helped me to grow up grow up into what I am today.
Mhm.
And as I mentioned before, I was lucky enough to meet Mr. Gogito Puridze, and of course, I was very good friends with Petra Hvedelidze. And Salome knows, I actually mentioned that in May when I was in Washington. I have an interview. It's a video interview with Petra Hvedelidze. It has never been shown to anyone. And I told Salome I'll send it to the Georgian Association. We can maybe screen it or do, but he talks about immigration there. He talks about Voice of America. He talks about Georgian Association. The idea for me to talk to him was about Alexander Kartveli because I was doing the research, but
Mhm.
it was very difficult to get him in front of the camera. Everyone knows that. So when he saw all these new photographs, when I got them out of the archives, he had a sensitive moment. He agreed he says, I'll tell you a few words about Kartveli. But that few words turned into a 40-minute interview, and he told the whole story of everything. So, yeah, I'll share it. I'll give it to the
That's
George.
great. That's great. That's great.
Yes.
Let me ask you one other question. So in addition to the VOA, were there any other news stories or news services that you were able to listen to, and how were they different than what the VOA was sharing with you? I mean, I'm not talking about the Soviet sources.
Oh, I
Were there
understand.
any other independent sources?
Maybe there was, but not for me. My father was really focused on VOA, and we had the chance to compare because we had this guy here. He was the international correspondent on the Soviet television. His name was Abon Tsitsiashvili, and for some reason he really hated Ronald Reagan. Every day he would talk bad things about Ronald Reagan. He really hated the guy. And so to compare, it was the greatest thing to compare what I was hearing on TV and what I was hearing on my father's radio. It was totally different, two worlds.
Okay, thanks, Jahaz.
Sure.
Eka, we need to hear from you now. You may be called perhaps the youngest generation of VOA journalists and someone who is continuing the legacy of Tsotne and Mai's parents. Can you tell us how you came to work for the VOA and what did you know about the VOA growing up in independent Georgia?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Hello again, and thank you to Association and to all of you to put this event together and honoring the legacy of VOA. I've been lucky to spend the last 8.5 years at VOA, and I'll take several seconds of thanking everyone. You mentioned several names, but there are many other people throughout decades who have brought this service up until today and who have served this mission, for whom VOA Georgian has never been just a job. And they were kind of serving something larger than themselves. They brought different perspectives, different skill set, different opinions, experience. So I think we really need to thank all of them, because they contributed to this mission one way or
Yeah.
another, whether it would be full-time staffers or stringers overseas, people on or behind the cameras. So I'm privileged to be the one to be talking to you now, but I know that I'm speaking for them as well. As for the questions, yes, I was among the youngest generations up until this spring. I've been working for VOA. My experience was definitely different from the experiences you've described. I was working as a multimedia reporter back in Georgia. VOA selected me and brought me here on a specialist exchange program. So that's how my journey started in January 2017. But as for VOA, I've heard, of course, from my grandparents as a story, as one of the most dangerous things they have been doing. Listening on shortwave radios, so what was happening beyond the Iron Curtain. Then I think from my parents, who also turned to VOA in different era, but also as ironic as it is, but to find out what was happening next door, to find out during, I don't know, April 9 events, for instance, to find out what was happening in the heart of their capital, they were finding this out from VOA and from RFE. So this is something that has changed. Maybe the circumstances have changed, but this is how my grandparents and my parents have equally needed in different eras, different political situations. And as for me, I was already turning to VOA as a young journalist later on when I wanted something more than news. I wanted something beyond the local, politically saturated and, whether manipulated or very local news. So I wanted something reliable, something having like unbiased reporting, in-depth analysis of what was going on outside of my country. So I think this need, importance, and the relevance has been very different for generations in my family, but it has never been diminished.
Great. Thank you, Eka. That was very interesting. Let's stay with you for a moment longer. So we mentioned earlier that there have been many changes in the VOA since in the initial broadcast in 1951. What changes have you witnessed in the service over the past several years since you joined? What's new or different?
Yeah, I guess the biggest milestone as for the service, as for me, and I was lucky to be there in 2018 in August, and I was actually hosting the last broadcast of our last radio show. And after all these decades, that was the first time that was entirely dedicated to all of us. We put together the staff in the old radio studio and broadcasted our last radio show from there, thanked our audience, told them about our plans, why we were doing it, and how and where could they find us. And that was very important because this was responsive to the changing media landscape in Georgia and overall. So VOA was adjusting to what the audience needed, right? From radio, it moved to more TV and digital broadcasting. So for last almost 9 years we've been trying to increase our reach, to diversify the content, to have not only our platforms like our website and other digital platforms, but also to partner with all the media outlets in Georgia. You will not be able to name any TV channel that one way or another we have not contributed and we have not provided the content. You mentioned Washington Today, which for last couple of years I've been hosting. It was the longest show that was aired on Georgian public broadcaster. Therefore, it was reaching wider audience, including the regions. So together with the national independent outlets, we've been working with regional outlets as well, trying to find the way not only to explain American policies and politics, provide the in-depth analysis of the events going on, diverse opinions, but also to have, to tell them more about America, as we loved to say, to tell America's story, tell success stories, tell stories about innovation, about the lifestyle, culture. So this component we tried to, of course, in the politically, when the media landscape is saturated with political content, it was way more difficult to do that, but we were still trying to shed a light on American culture. So together with the pre-recorded, prepared materials, TV packages, shows, we've been doing ad hoc live reporting, interviews, and everything. So and then for last years we were trying to switch the gears towards more digital first content and try to meet the audience where they were. For me personally, very important periods for coverage was also the COVID pandemic, when the importance of reliable information against the tons of misinformation and manipulation had real value and real impact on human lives, whether we would provide the unbiased information, whether it would be the pandemic or the vaccines itself. And of course, the full-scale war in Ukraine. That was, for me personally, one of the most important periods of coverage, when we provided analysis, military, political, human stories from the front lines. And just one moment that I have not witnessed myself, but from my colleagues, I know that this was a very emotionally and professionally very difficult time, and that's probably very relevant for the reason why we are here today. That was August 2008, Russian aggression towards Georgia, and that time, Georgian service was also going through the significant downsizing and actually facing the existential questions about its existence. But then unfortunately happened what happened, and everything that was happening after that kind of proved VOA Georgians and Georgian language broadcasting of an American broadcaster, its relevance, its importance, and its need was once again very clear, with very unfortunate reasons. But I think that's a very interesting note, that it was happening the same what we heard from the letter in the beginning.
Thanks, Eka. I'm so glad you were able to join us today and give us your perspective, which also reflects a bit of your colleagues' perspective, those who are still at the VOA Georgian service. Thank you. Let me turn back to you, Tsotne, and Eka referred to the letter just a moment ago. So your parents were working at the VOA in 1958 when the letter that we've talked about was published. The letter that was published by the Georgian Association president and secretary. Do you know what the events were that led to the possible decision to close the Georgian language service? And do you remember anything as to what the Georgian diaspora decided to do? I mean, obviously we have the letter, but do you recall any of the conversations from that era by chance?
I don't recall the letter specifically. I remember my father talking about, the possibility of closing the service or folding it, with the Russian desk, which was just, they couldn't imagine anything more horrible
Worse,
than being a subset of the Russian service. It kind of defeated the whole purpose of what the Georgian desk was about, and I remember there was a lot of anxiety over it, but never really heard anything specific about the letter. But
Okay.
after a while, it just kind of died away. And
Okay. And so growing up in the U.S. during the Cold War, from a family of immigrants like my sister and myself, what did your peers think about your background, and did they even understand what had happened to your family, and what did they what did they think? Did they know anything about the VOA? And
Um, they knew a little bit about it. You know, I talked about it. The one thing I always have to remind people about is that we were not Russian, and you know that was an assumption sometimes people made when you first described where Georgia was. Oh, you're part of Russia, and do you speak Russian? And that's something you always had to clarify for
yeah,
for
I remember.
well, a couple of my friends, you know, that I was close with. One of them was a neighbor down the street. You know, he kind of understood. His father was actually a very distant relative of Winston Churchill, and so he had a little bit broader view of the world, so to speak. So you know, he kind of understood about my parents' background. But as far as a lot of the other peers, you know, as a teenager, you kind of had other interests at the time. So.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Sotle. And Ramaz, going back to you, did
Yes.
you know anything about the Georgian diaspora in the US or elsewhere for that matter, the diaspora in Paris?
Well, as I mentioned, my father told me stories about how they met because my father still is the general director of Georgian State National Singing and Dancing Ensemble. Now it's called Erisioni. And they toured in 1977 and they met several, I still remember several names, as I said, Alexander Putkaradze and Shota Dumbadze. They lived in California, I believe in Los Angeles. And as Totne mentioned, there was like a very uneasy situation because everyone was careful. Even though they were together, they were careful not to talk to each other too much because well you understand why. The people from ensemble were even in a bigger problem because every ensemble had a person from KGB. I even made a documentary several years ago about that. Every ensemble traveling to the United States, someone was from KGB, you know, watching everyone who he was talking to, what they were talking about, and things like that. So it was very tense, very happy occasion, of course, because Georgians came and you know your parents and their friends, they were very happy, but not very easy to actually talk to each other. So no, I know all those names from my father, and that's probably triggered inside me what I've done all my life because I was really interested in learning more about Georgian diaspora, and now I know I know a lot, and I just wrote a book about Alexander Kartveli. By
Okay.
the way, Sotnes, thank you so much for the photograph you sent me on email. That's very, I was very happy about that.
Ramaz, can you continue and tell us how did you become interested in Georgian diaspora research? And
Well,
did the VOA play any role in that?
no, as you know, when something's you know forbidden, that's where you want to go and you know more about it. So when I came to the United States in 2000 to study, I went to school in Seattle, Washington. I started learning about, you know, there were some websites, and Kartveli was the first one I stumbled upon. And as I love everything about aviation, and I decided to learn more about this person. And I did well in August 17 was marked 20 years since I'm doing the research on Kartveli, and that research took me many ways. I met a lot of people. I learned a lot of people. Actually, late Shota Washakize, you probably knew him. Some of you. He lived in Freehold, New Jersey. Several years ago, Shota Washakize asked me. We actually got the camera and we recorded Valiko Zamia and Petre Hvedelis. Actually, Petre Hvedelis didn't agree to be recorded later. I did that. He was very difficult. But yeah, I wanted to learn more about the life that was coming from my father's radio. And I found an incredible people, incredible stories. And then because of the Kartveli, I had access on a newspaper archive. So right now, I have about 600 articles starting from, I think, 1875, talking about Georgia and the stories about all the immigrants, whether it's Chavchavadzes or Zaldastani or anyone. I mean, you name it, I have everything. And actually talked to the United States Embassy to maybe we'll be releasing those articles as a book, as a reminder that our the friendship didn't start in 1992. It started 150 years ago.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Eka, let me ask a question to you, and then we'll transition. From your perspective, why do you think the Voice of America remained a critical voice and source of information for Georgian media during the information age? I mean, what role did the Georgia service play?
I think everything that we discussed already just shows that VOA was not static, right? It was not there where it started. It was evolving, it was changing, it was adapting to what the countries and what the people needed, what were the challenges, social, political, economic. So it was kind of adapting to these changing challenges that its people had. And the importance of whatever it is beyond the Iron Curtain or beyond labeling it as a foreign agent or undesirable organization, the need of fact-based journalism and content is never less important or less needed. So especially now in the era of social media and all this digital content, in the era of AI, when we have hard time, all of us, figuring out what is true and what is not, having the source of information that has this huge legacy behind it, the history, the brand name, which is free from domestic political agendas, domestic political interference or manipulation, and also, which is no less important, free from commercial interests from one way or another. I think that is something that kept VOA as a credible source of information for Georgian speaking audience, not only in Georgia and in America, but also in other countries as well. Our data later in latest years were showing that we had huge audiences in European countries as well, Georgian speakers in Italy, in Greece, where we have huge Georgian diaspora. So importance of VOA for diaspora, having this trusted voice in the noise, I think that has been very important. And yes, as we said, like the challenges and the threats are different. The concept or nature of Iron Curtain might have changed, but all those threats to unbiased, truthful information and more than information, right? The analysis, the content, the commentary, all those threats are coming already in different shapes, right? In different formats, whether it's Russian disinformation, anti-Western narratives, politically motivated or manipulated content, labeling journalists as agents. So all these challenges are changing, but the need of in journalism is not changing. So I think that's what kept VOA relevant, that it always tried to meet the audience where they were in terms of the content and also in terms of the format and the changing landscape.
That was an excellent closing point. And I'll just add, I mean, the challenges are now global. It's not just for those countries in the former Soviet Union. It's a global challenge, no matter where you live. Now, before I pass the mic back to Eka and Salome, let me just note once again the relative smallness of the Georgian diaspora in the United States meant that the Georgian community, despite its many differences, engaged collectively to counter Soviet propaganda, educate an American public that there was more than one Georgia in the world, and that its biggest city was not Atlanta, Georgia. We had to maintain our cultural and linguistic uniqueness. And finally, share in the hope that one day Georgia would indeed regain her independence and open communications between family and friends could be restored, which it has, thankfully. The Voice of America's Georgian Service and the Georgian Association were among those entities that provided that Georgian voice, both for those in Georgia, but also to our American friends who stood in sympathy to the cause of Georgian independence. So let me pass the mic back to Eka and Salome for closing comments. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. What a fantastic way to commemorate the work and the impact of the Voice of America for Georgians, for Georgian Americans, and for journalism overall. Before I do any closing remarks, I want to make sure that we take some questions from the audience. So if anyone has questions, or if you even have your own memories, I see various people. I see Anna Galandadze on the call. I see, Mary Guitashvili. I see others on the call who may have things that they remember as well. Lizzie is here, Nino Maladze. I'm not going to call on everyone, but if you have memories to share or any questions to our speakers, please feel free to unmute yourself and or put it in the chat. David.
First of all, thank you so much. My name is David Nogradze. Today I reside in Washington, D.C. This is absolutely fascinating. And as I told you, it's very good timing for me because I'm actually writing a little piece about impact of Voice of America on me and my life in 80s. As someone who was born in mid-70s, I remember very vividly what an impact on myself the Voice of America had. I was lucky to have my parents who taught me what that is and asked me to listen to to Voice of America, Georgian service, Russian service, and then forced me English service, although I barely understood anything as a little child. One quick anecdote, it was that, as you know, Voice of America was jammed by the stations, but not they didn't jam sports or music. They jammed when there was some important news covering politics or something that they so they didn't want us to hear. And every time, and I remember vividly this tremendous noise they would put on the broadcast, and we couldn't hear anything. And my father would start to curse at this particular Russian lady. Her name was Kristianinova. I had no idea. I had no idea who she was. My mother didn't really react. She just took it as it was. And my father started, every time he would hear this white noise, he would be cursing at this woman. Years later, her name popped up again. After, of course, the jamming stopped around 87, if I'm not mistaken, or 88 maybe. And nevertheless, he mentioned her name again, and then I remembered her name. And Father, could you tell me who is that woman that you curse every time you would hear this white noise jamming the stations? Turns out this Kristianinova was the in charge of the jamming stations. So she was the one who would be giving these orders to start jamming of the stations and jamming stations. The ones that were jamming in Georgia, they were located in Baltic states, and the ones who were jamming Baltic states, they would be located in Central Asia. This is how radio works. I'm not, a physicist, but this is how apparently it works. But she was in charge. I actually later Googled her because when I started writing this little piece, I started Googling and find out about her. You can see. And to wrap it up, not to take you the time, those three stations, which was on shortwaves, which was Voice of America, Radio Liberty, and BBC. I remember the station, I think it was 39, 41, and 46 on shortwave. They were called the Voices, or Galasach, maybe. Because of Voice of America. So all these three, this kind of the name for all the stations were this the Voices, and the Voices is absolutely imprinted in my head, especially at the end in 1992. There was it. I don't know if anyone remembers. I would love to hear your memories of that. There was the lottery, the raffle by Voice of America for the listeners in 1982, and the number one prize was the trip for two people to Disneyland. It was for the Eurasia region, for former Soviet Union, or there were some cassettes and T-shirts. You were supposed to write the letter, send it to Voice of America address, and there would be a raffle, and your name would have come up. At dedicated time, I sent about 50 letters on all neighbors, all the family members we had, my friends. I was sitting down and writing those letters to those envelopes to be sent And a few months later, I was sitting when they were announcing the winner of who would get the trip to the United States, and I did not win. There was some Belarusian man, his name I don't remember, who won this. But few weeks later, this magic thing started to happen. Not all, but some of my relatives, my uncle, my cousin, started receiving those gifts. My uncle got the cassette of Natalie Cole, her album, jazz album. My cousin, she got T-shirts. It was commemorating the 50 years of Voice of America. So it was the white T-shirt with the yellow Voice of America written on it, and in every name that VOA broadcasted, including Georgian, so Kartuliana was written on it. I was absolutely delighted. I didn't got anything, but my cousin got 2 T-shirts, so I got 1 T-shirt as a present, and I was wearing the T-shirt until it disintegrated. It was covered in holes. It was shameful to wear, but I was still kind of happily wearing it because it was big Voice of America and Kartuliana written on it. So this little anecdote from me, and it's especially hearing the Voice of America being shut down and not to hear those voices again. It's really sad thing. And thank you again to organizing this, and thank you so much.
Thank you, David. What a cool story and a great memory. Before I hand it over to Anna Kalandadze, just for a couple of words, I'm so glad to have you here. I wanted to mention that while this conversation started, to give us a little bit of insight to just how much memory there is out there, as I mentioned in the beginning, we are collaborating on this Diaspora History program project with the Georgian Studies program. And so, of course, just to give you how it ended, this letter that we started talking about, we know that the efforts, while probably it wasn't just because of the Georgian Association's advocacy efforts that it, continued, we know that it contributed to the survival of the Voice of America Georgian service at the time in 1958. And how we know is that while we don't yet have our hands on the actual original letter, we know from our archives that are now at the Immigration Museum in Tbilisi, is that the association actually received responses from Governor of New York Harriman at the time and President Eisenhower's secretary in September of 1958. So they had sent the letter in August. And then in September, they received a letter saying that, giving them assurances that they had looked into the matter and this was really important, and that Georgian service of Voice of America would not be shut down. So at this time that we are, facing this, again, existential crossroad for Voice of America, we want to make sure, we want to pause and commemorate everything that they have done. And in the future, this is not the end. We are actually excited about planning a longer event that is dedicated to Voice of America. So keep in touch with us. While you look at the websites and so forth, keep in touch with us. You can sign up for our newsletter, as well as social media, etc. And if you have stories or memories or materials to contribute to this project, like David just did, I'm sure others have other pieces to contribute, reach out to us, please. And as I mentioned, we run on volunteers, and we have a wonderful group of volunteers who are interested in helping us collate and collect all this information. You can volunteer into this project, but you can also just fill out a form that we're going to drop in the chat and fill out your contact information, and our volunteers will follow up with you and gather that material from you so we can continue to, enrich the Georgian Studies Project, as well as the Georgian Association's archives with all these wonderful memories of the great work that Georgian Service of Voice of America has accomplished over so many decades. So let me hand it over to Anna Kalandadze, the Chief of Georgian Service for Voice of America here in Washington, since we have the wonderful opportunity that she has joined us.
Thank you, Salome. Thank you, Association. I'm sorry I had some technical problems and joined you belatedly. Again, thank you for your kind words. the association with whom we share a close common cooperation and a close history, joint history for this dedication. Also, thank you to the community for just standing with us, sharing our past, present, future perspectives. Again, Amana Kalandadze from VOA, being on an administrative leave from our agency, I'm not really able to fully talk to you and comment to you about the state of affairs. However, excuse me, I wanted to really bring my thanks and hope, as Salva said, to continue the discussions on repercussions of this development virtually or through storytelling memoirs or through our contributions to the Davis Center at Harvard, to Library of Congress, and to the Georgian Association. Thank you again so much. Talk to you.
Thank you so much. If there are any other questions, we can take another question. In the meantime, I will say if you're interested in financially supporting these efforts, because probably some travel, some other costs will be involved, technology and so forth, or any of the other associations programming, you can visit our donations page. No support is too little. We are happy to have any support. Like I said, time is a very important contribution, and we are grateful to our volunteers and all the supporters. If you would like to make a larger donation, you can reach out by email, and our treasurer, who's also online, Veronica Metonidze, can follow up with you. Of course, all donations are tax deductible to the extent allowed by the IRS rules. Now I also would like to use this opportunity to invite you to our upcoming events, because we have a visit to the Library of Congress coming up in person, which will let us look at the different Georgian collections there. There will be recurring events for this. We also have an online book club, where it's a virtual group reading Georgian literature translated in English. The information on that is also on our website. And just a couple of weeks ago, we had Professor Donald Rayfield as a guest in the book club to discuss his translations and the perspectives on the future of Georgian to English translation. It's also posted on our YouTube page, and this recording will also be posted to the same YouTube page. We are also considering a movie screening in the fall that will be possibly with some Georgian food potluck style. So if you're in the DC area, we welcome you to stay in touch for that. And if you have an idea of something you would like to do, and you would like to have like-minded individuals, there's dozens of volunteers happy to jump in and make things happen, just like this event. And so please do reach out. Like I said, time is the most precious contribution, and we truly appreciate it. Let me hand it back over to any other questions, because I want to make sure folks have a chance to ask questions to the speakers. All right, well, seeing none, then let me again thank you everyone for taking the time on a Friday afternoon or morning or evening, as I see some joining from Georgia as well. Thank you to our speakers, to our host, Eliso. Thank you everyone so much. And thank you VOA for everything that you have done and everything that you are still doing, and hopefully more to come. So yeah, we will see you again.
And as
have a great day, everyone.
Bye. And as the letter that we began this evening is signed off at the end with გამარჯვების სიმედითა ქართული ღიმილით, which means, with the hope of victory and Georgian smile. Nakhwamdis. Thank you so very much.
See you later.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.